I didn't know my life was about to split into a before and an after. The moment my father came home from the grocery store and said, "You remember Victor, right? From high school?" At the time, it sounded harmless. Ordinary, even. Just one of those sentences that drift through a kitchen while dinner's cooking and the TV murmurs in the background. I was 21, working full-time at a warehouse, taking night classes at community college, trying to build something steady out of a life that had already learned how fragile stability could be. My parents divorced when I was 15. My dad kept the house, the mortgage, and the quiet loneliness that settled in afterward. I stayed, not because he asked, but because I offered. We were a team. We paid the bills together. We survived together. So when he told me about Victor, his old friend, recently unemployed, living out of a beat-up van with 4 kids, I saw the decision form in my father's eyes before he even said it out loud. He was going to help. That was who my dad was, the man who couldn't say no, the man who believed kindness was never wasted, even when it cost him sleep, money, or peace. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that by opening our front door, we were inviting chaos into a house that had worked hard to stay calm. I didn't know I'd soon be waking up every weekend to a crying 3-year-old who wasn't mine. I didn't know I'd be watching a 12-year-old girl quietly learn how to parent her brothers while pretending she was fine. I didn't know I'd be standing in my own kitchen, phone in my hand, staring at a text message that proved a grown man had walked out on his children without even asking who would keep them safe. And I definitely didn't know that when I finally told my father the truth, when I stopped protecting a lie that was hurting everyone, I would be blamed for destroying a family. This is the story of what happens when helping turns into enabling, when silence becomes complicity, and when telling the truth costs more than you ever expected, but still ends up being the only thing that saves you. My name is Brianna, and at 21, I already felt older than my age. Not in the "I'm so mature" way people brag about online, more like the quiet exhaustion that comes from balancing adulthood on a budget while pretending it doesn't scare you. I'd been working full-time at a warehouse for 2 years, the kind of job that doesn't care if you're tired, grieving, or stressed. Boxes still move, pallets still stack, the clock still punches you back if you're late. On top of that, I took night classes at community college, not because I loved studying after standing on concrete floors all day, but because I needed a way out. A degree, a certificate, something that would eventually mean I didn't have to trade my body for a paycheck. I lived with my dad, Mark, in the same house we'd been in since I was a kid. My parents divorced when I was 15. I remember the exact sound of the front door that night, my mom's suitcase wheels clicking over the threshold, then the silence afterward, like the house itself didn't know how to breathe without her. Mark got the house in the settlement, but he also got the mortgage still attached like an anchor. He didn't ask me to stay after high school. He never tried to guilt me into it. He was too proud for that. I was the one who offered. "I can help with bills," I told him, trying to sound casual while my stomach tightened. "Just until I finish school, until I save enough to get my own place." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes soft, tired in a way I didn't fully understand until I got older. Then he nodded. "You can stay as long as you need, Bree. We'll figure it out." That was Mark, always we. He worked day shift at the post office, steady and reliable, the kind of man who believed showing up mattered more than being noticed. Between his income and mine, we kept everything running. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, the small repairs that pop up like ambushes, water heater, leaky sink, tires that decide to give up without warning. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, quiet, predictable. And in our world, predictability was safety. My dad's personality made him easy to love and easy to exploit. He volunteered at church every Sunday. He drove elderly neighbors to their doctor appointments. Last winter, he spent 3 weekends rebuilding a coworker's deck for free, coming home with red hands and a smile like he'd just been paid in gratitude. I used to admire that so much about him. But I also saw the pattern. People learned my father had soft edges, and they leaned into him like a door that wouldn't lock. And Mark, he never called it taking advantage. He called it helping. Helping was his religion. That's why when Victor came back into his life, it didn't take much for my dad's heart to get involved. It started in April at a grocery store. My dad ran into Victor, an old friend from high school. They'd stayed close over the years, even though Victor moved 2 hours away about a decade ago. Mark came home that evening with that specific look he got when his empathy had already made a decision before his logic could argue. He told me the story over dinner. Victor was in the parking lot in a beat-up van with 4 kids, suitcases and boxes stacked like they'd been living out of it. Turned out they'd been staying in an extended stay motel for nearly 2 months. Victor had lost his factory job when they downsized, couldn't make rent, and his part-time gas station shifts barely covered food and the motel room. His ex-wife had 2 of the kids sometimes, but she wasn't helping financially. My dad looked genuinely shaken when he said it. "Bree," he told me, voice low like the walls could hear. "They're just stuck." I remember staring at my plate, appetite gone. I didn't even know Victor yet, and I already felt the weight of what was coming. Because I knew my dad, and I knew what happened when my dad saw someone struggling. The next day, Mark called Victor and offered him and the kids a place to stay. 4 months, clear timeline, clear boundary. Just long enough for Victor to get back on his feet, save for a deposit, find full-time work. Victor apparently thanked him 100 times. Promised he wouldn't be a burden. Promised he'd be out as soon as possible. And my father, my good, hopeful father, believed him. When Victor and his kids moved in the first week of May, I told myself the same thing my dad did. It's temporary. It's the right thing to do. It'll be okay. But okay is always the lie people tell themselves right before the storm hits. When Victor and the kids first moved in, I really tried to believe we'd done the right thing. The first week felt almost functional. Victor's oldest daughter, Jessie, was 12, sharp-eyed, quiet in that way kids get when they've learned early not to ask for too much. The other 3 were boys, 9, 6, and 3. My dad cleared out the spare bedroom for Victor, and the kids took over the finished basement. It was crowded, but it worked. Victor talked a lot about job applications. He showed my dad emails, mentioned interviews, complained about automated rejection systems like they were personal enemies. He picked up extra shifts at the gas station whenever he could. In the evenings, he cooked simple meals for his kids, made sure homework got done. Jessie helped wrangle her brothers with a calm efficiency that didn't feel age-appropriate, but at the time, I didn't question it. I worked second shift at the warehouse, usually getting home around midnight. Most nights, I didn't see much of what happened after dinner. I'd slip inside quietly, kick off my boots, and go straight to bed. On weekends, things still felt manageable. I helped my dad with yard work or errands. The kids played outside or watched TV. It wasn't peaceful exactly, but it wasn't chaos either. Then, somewhere around the 3rd week, the rhythm changed. Victor started leaving early in the mornings. Not up at dawn for work early, more like slipping out before anyone else woke up. At first, my dad brushed it off. Victor said he had interviews, networking meetings, leads in other cities. "I've got to hustle," he'd say, clapping my dad on the shoulder like they were still teenagers chasing dreams. But the kids, they were still there. I noticed it first on my days off. I'd wake up around 9 or 10 and find all 4 kids already awake, bowls of cereal lined up on the counter like a silent assembly line. No Victor. The 3-year-old needed help with everything. The 6-year-old wasn't far behind. The 9-year-old had a temper and a mouth, already testing how far he could push his sister. And Jessie was doing her best. She changed diapers. She broke up fights. She tried to keep them entertained without leaving the house. She apologized constantly. "I'm sorry they're loud," she'd whisper. I tried to keep them quiet. She shouldn't have been apologizing to anyone. My dad left for work at 6 every morning. He didn't see this side of it. When he got home around 3:30, Victor was sometimes back, acting like everything was normal. Other times, Victor would text that he'd be late, and my dad would shrug and step in. He'd make dinner, help with homework, tell himself Victor was just grinding. I didn't say anything at first. Part of it was denial. Part of it was guilt. Victor was struggling after all. Who was I to complain when he was trying to keep his family afloat? But as the weeks went on, it got worse. By mid-June, Victor was gone overnight 3 or 4 times a week. Friday afternoon, gone. Saturday, gone. Sunday morning, sometimes back, sometimes not. The kids stayed, every time. My weekends stopped being weekends. I'd be woken up at 7 by a crying toddler who'd wet the bed, or a 6-year-old pounding on my door because he was hungry. I'd drag myself out of bed, exhausted before the day even started, and handle it. Because what was the alternative? Let them starve? Sit in their own mess? Jessie always tried to help. She'd hover nearby, wringing her hands, apologizing like she'd failed a test she never signed up for. I worked 45 hours a week. I had classes 2 nights a week. Weekends were supposed to be when I recovered. Instead, I was running a daycare I never agreed to. My grades started slipping. I caught myself zoning out in class, rereading the same paragraph over and over. I nearly fell asleep standing up at work. Twice. My supervisor pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. I lied. I'm just tired. My dad still didn't know how bad it was. He asked the kids if their dad was around, and they said yes, because technically, Victor always came back eventually. I kept hoping it would get better, that Victor would land a real job, that this was just a rough patch. But deep down, a heavy truth was settling in my chest. Victor wasn't just struggling. He was disappearing, and he was leaving his children behind like collateral damage. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in early July. I remember it clearly because I had the day off, one of the rare weekdays where my body expected rest instead of responsibility. I went to sleep the night before with that small, fragile relief humming in my chest. No alarms, no forklifts, no classrooms. Just quiet. When I woke up around 8, the house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that feels wrong, like the air is holding its breath. I got up and walked downstairs to the basement. All 4 kids were asleep, tangled in blankets on the pull-out couch and the floor. Jessie stirred but didn't wake. I stood there longer than I meant to, watching the slow rise and fall of their chests. Then I went upstairs. Victor's bedroom door was open. The bed was made, too neatly. My stomach tightened. I checked my phone. There was a text from Victor, time-stamped 5:02 a.m. Had to head out of town for a few days. Job opportunity. Be back by the weekend. That was it. No question, no request, no acknowledgement that 4 children were still sleeping in his house. He had just left. I stood in the kitchen, staring at my phone like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. My hands felt numb. My thoughts scattered between anger, disbelief, and something colder, recognition. This wasn't an accident. Jessie came upstairs a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She glanced around the kitchen, then looked at me. Is my dad home? I handed her my phone. She read the text, nodded once, and said quietly, Okay, I'll take care of the boys. Something inside me snapped. Not at her, never at her. At him. I texted Victor back immediately. You can't just leave your kids like this, you need to come back. Hours passed. No response. The kids woke up around 9, chaos blooming instantly. The 3-year-old cried for his dad. The 6-year-old was hungry. The 9-year-old started arguing with Jessie about the TV. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, juice boxes. I felt like I was moving on autopilot, my body doing what it always did when something needed fixing, while my mind screamed. Victor finally texted back just before noon. They're fine. Jessie's old enough. Stop worrying. I stared at the message, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I typed back, She's 12. This isn't okay. No response. Again. By the time my dad came home that afternoon, my nerves were shot. The kids were watching cartoons. Jessie sat on the floor, her back against the couch, eyes dull with exhaustion. My dad noticed immediately. Where's Victor? He asked. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my lungs on the way in. And I told him everything. Not just about that day, but about the weeks leading up to it. The overnight absences, the weekends, Jessie raising her brothers, me waking up to crying kids, my grades slipping, the exhaustion. My dad didn't interrupt. He just sat there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. When I finished, the room felt unbearably still. He picked up his phone and called Victor. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Throughout the evening, he tried 3 more times. He texted, saying they needed to talk immediately. Victor finally responded around 9 that night. Sorry, interview was important. I'll explain when I get back. My dad exhaled slowly, like he was trying to hold onto his temper by force. We'll talk when he's home, he said. In the meantime, we take care of the kids. None of this is their fault. Victor came back Thursday night, 2 full days later. He walked into the house like nothing had happened, launching straight into a story about a great job lead in another city. My dad stopped him mid-sentence. Why did you think it was acceptable to leave your children without telling anyone? Victor's face hardened. Jessie's capable, he said. I watched my siblings growing up. It's not a big deal. My dad's voice stayed calm, but something sharp edged its way into it. That's not the point. You made a commitment when you moved in here. Victor scoffed. Said my dad was being unfair. Said life was hard. Said he was doing his best. My dad said he understood. But doing your best didn't mean dumping responsibility on a 12-year-old or turning our home into unpaid childcare. I stood in the doorway, listening. Victor looked at me and snapped. You didn't have to help. Nobody forced you. I met his eyes. You're right, I said, but somebody had to, and it wasn't you. That's when he exploded. He called me spoiled. said I didn't understand real struggle, accused me of living rent-free with everything handed to me. I told him I paid half the bills, worked full-time, went to school at night. My dad told us both to stop. "We'll talk in the morning," he said. Victor grabbed his keys. "I need air." He left and didn't come back that night. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessie's face when she said, "I'll take care of the boys." Not angry, not surprised, just resigned. That image sat heavy in my chest like something unfinished. When morning came, the house felt tense in a way I'd never experienced before. The kids were quiet, too quiet, like they could sense the fault line running through the adults above them. My dad made coffee but didn't drink it. He kept checking his phone. Victor came back mid-morning. He looked tired, but not apologetic. That was what struck me first. No guilt in his posture, no hesitation in his steps. He sat on the couch like he was waiting for us to apologize. My dad asked me to join them in the living room. He spoke calmly, carefully, like someone choosing words not to wound. "If you're going to stay here," he said, "we need some clear rules. You can't leave your kids without supervision. You need to communicate. You need to respect the people helping you." Victor cut him off. "I don't need rules." The air shifted. "I'm an adult," Victor continued. "I can make my own decisions." My dad nodded once. "That's fine, but adults also take responsibility." Victor stood up abruptly, pacing like a caged animal. "You're treating me like a child," he snapped. "I appreciate the help, but I don't need lectures on how to raise my kids." "This isn't about parenting," my dad said evenly. "It's about basic responsibility." Victor laughed, short, sharp. "If that's how you feel," he said, "maybe it's time I leave." My dad didn't argue. "If that's your choice," he said, "you have until the end of the week." Victor sneered. "I'll be out by the end of the day." Then he turned to me. "This is your fault," he said. "If you just minded your own business, everything would have been fine." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Victor went upstairs and started packing. Drawers slamming, boxes dragged across the floor. The sound echoed through the house like punctuation marks on something already decided. My dad went downstairs to talk to the kids. I followed a few minutes later. Jessie started crying the moment my dad explained they were leaving. Not loud sobs, just silent tears rolling down her face. The younger boys didn't understand. They asked questions my dad couldn't answer. "Where are we going? Why can't we stay? Did we do something wrong?" My dad knelt in front of them, voice steady but eyes wet. "No," he said. "None of this is your fault." Victor came back inside to grab the last of their things. He didn't look at my dad. He looked at me. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he said. "You broke up a family that needed help." Then he left. The van pulled away, taillights disappearing down the street. The silence afterward was deafening. My dad sat on the couch, hands clasped, staring at nothing. I asked if he was okay. "I'll be fine," he said. "I just wish it had turned out differently." I apologized, words tumbling out of me like I needed to confess to something. "I'm sorry I caused problems." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "You didn't cause anything," he said. "Victor made his own choices." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. That evening, my dad's phone started buzzing nonstop. People from church, old friends, acquaintances who'd never called before. Victor had posted on social media. According to him, my dad had kicked him and his children out onto the street without warning. No context, no mention of the weeks he'd been gone, no acknowledgement of Jessie raising her brothers. Just a carefully crafted victim narrative. Some callers were neutral, asking what happened. Others weren't. One woman from church said my dad should have been more patient, that struggling people needed extra grace. My dad replied quietly, "I gave him 4 months of grace." But the damage was done. The gossip spread. My dad stopped volunteering at church for a while. He didn't say it bothered him, but I could see it in the way he replayed conversations, second-guessing himself. And I felt the guilt creep back in. Because speaking up had consequences. Because doing the right thing didn't feel clean or victorious. It felt messy, lonely, expensive. And deep down I wondered, had I done the right thing or just the loudest thing? If the story had ended with Victor driving away, maybe I could have convinced myself the worst was over. Instead, everything escalated. 2 weeks after Victor left, my dad got a call from Teddy, a woman from church. She was the same one who gently but firmly suggested my dad hadn't shown enough grace. Her voice on the phone sounded different now, tight, embarrassed. She called to apologize. Victor and his kids had been staying with her family since leaving our house. And he'd done the exact same thing. He disappeared for days at a time, claimed he was working, claimed he had interviews, left Jessie in charge. Again. Teddy's husband followed Victor one weekend and discovered the truth. Victor was staying with a woman he'd been seeing, his girlfriend, about an hour away. He wasn't working. He was using Teddy's house as free childcare while he played house somewhere else. When Teddy confronted him, Victor gave her the same script he'd given us. Said she didn't understand. Said he needed space. Said Jessie was old enough. Teddy gave him a week to leave. Victor accused her of cruelty and packed up that same night. When my dad hung up the phone, he sat quietly for a long time. She believed him, he said finally, just like I did. Word spread faster after that. Other people from church started asking Teddy what happened. Victor was posting again, more dramatic, more accusatory, betrayed by people he trusted, abandoned by so-called Christians. This time, my dad decided not to stay silent. He made a post of his own. Calm, measured, no names, no insults, just facts. He explained he'd offered help with clear boundaries, and those boundaries were repeatedly violated. He said he couldn't enable behavior that put children at risk. The response was mixed. Some people apologized for judging him. Others quietly disappeared. A few doubled down, insisting helping meant enduring anything. But then things took a darker turn. One afternoon, I got a message on social media. It was from Jessie. She said her dad told her to contact me. He needed a favor. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. My stomach tightened with a familiar dread, the kind that comes when you know saying yes will cost you something. She messaged again a few hours later. It's important. He's in trouble. I finally replied and asked what was going on. Victor was staying with another friend now. That situation was also falling apart. He'd borrowed money, promised to pay it back by the end of the month, and didn't have it. The friend was threatening to call the police. Victor wanted my dad to lend him the money. I showed the messages to my dad. He read them slowly, then shook his head. No, he said, I can't. I hesitated. Jessie sounds scared. I know, he replied, but giving him money now won't fix anything. It'll just teach him he can keep doing this. I messaged Jessie back and explained my dad couldn't help. She sent a sad face emoji. Then she said something I still think about. My dad says people are selfish and nobody really wants to help others. I'm starting to think he's right. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to tell her that wasn't true, that kindness existed, that adults were supposed to protect kids from their own failures. Instead, I said, sometimes adults make things complicated. None of this is your fault. A few days later, Victor called my dad directly. He was furious. He said my dad had ruined his life, that he was about to lose his kids because he had nowhere stable to live. That Child Services was investigating him because someone reported the kids were being left alone. He blamed us for everything. My dad stayed calm. You made your choices, he said. I'm not responsible for the consequences. Victor screamed that my dad was a hypocrite, a fake Christian, someone who pretended to care but turned his back when it mattered. Then he hung up. The following Sunday, Victor showed up at church with all 4 kids. My dad stayed through the service, but I could tell he was on edge. Victor sat in the back, staring at him the entire time. Afterward, in the parking lot, Victor approached him, voice loud enough for people to notice. You need to make this right, Victor said. You owe me. My dad said he didn't owe him anything and got into his car. Victor yelled after him. That week, my dad's car was keyed in the church parking lot. No proof, just timing. Then someone left a bag of trash on our front porch with a note taped to it. Karma. My dad filed a police report. Nothing came of it. We installed security cameras anyway. The stress started wearing him down. He wasn't sleeping well. He stopped going to church again. Not out of shame this time, but fear. People kept asking me what happened. Some accused me directly. One man told me I was the reason Victor's kids were suffering, that I should have just helped more. I blocked him. 5 weeks after Victor first left, Jessie messaged me again. This time she said she needed to tell me something, but I couldn't tell her dad. She told me the truth. Victor had received a job offer back in June. He turned it down because it required moving to another state, and he didn't want to leave his girlfriend. He'd been spending most of his time and money on that relationship. He made Jessie lie about where he was. She was tired of lying. She wanted my dad to know the truth. When I told my dad, he wasn't surprised. I suspected, he said quietly. I just didn't have proof. He didn't expose Victor, didn't retaliate. The truth comes out on its own, he said. But by then, the damage was already done. And we were heading straight toward the emotional breaking point, whether we wanted it or not. The lowest point didn't arrive with shouting or confrontation. It arrived quietly, like exhaustion finally winning. A few days after Jessie told me the truth, my dad sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. The house felt heavier than it ever had, like the walls had absorbed every argument, every accusation, every doubt. "I keep thinking," he said finally, "about what I could have done differently." That sentence scared me more than Victor's anger ever had. My dad had always been steady, not unshakable, but grounded. Seeing him unravel himself piece by piece, replaying decisions like a court transcript, made the guilt I'd been carrying flare into something sharper. "This all started because I opened my mouth," I said. "If I hadn't—" He cut me off gently. "No." But even as he said it, I could tell he was tired of convincing both of us. That week, he barely slept. I'd hear him pacing at night, stopping at the front window, checking the cameras like he expected Victor to reappear at any moment. He jumped when his phone buzzed. He flinched at unexpected knocks. So did I. Every sound felt like a threat. Every unknown number made my heart race. I started having trouble concentrating again. At work, my hands moved on muscle memory while my mind spiraled. In class, words blurred together. I kept thinking about Jessie, how easily she'd accepted responsibility that never should have been hers. Then the call came. It was from Child Protective Services. The caseworker's voice was calm, professional. She told me they'd received a report that I was living in an unsafe environment, that my father was allegedly running an unlicensed daycare and leaving children unsupervised. I laughed at first, a short, disbelieving sound that came out wrong. "I'm an adult," I said, "and the kids don't live here anymore." She explained they still had to investigate. When the caseworker came to the house, my dad laid everything out. The timeline, the messages, the boundaries, the truth. She listened, took notes, nodded. By the end, she told us the report was clearly malicious. The case would be closed, but the report would remain on file. We didn't have to say his name. We both knew. After she left, my dad sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. "That crosses a line," he said. Something inside me cracked then. I'd spent weeks doubting myself, wondering if I'd caused all this by speaking up. But this wasn't misunderstanding or hurt feelings. This was retaliation. That night, my dad admitted something he hadn't said out loud before. "I'm scared," he said quietly, "not for myself, for you." The idea that my father, my protector, felt like he'd failed to shield me from this, it gutted me. I felt responsible for the stress, for the gossip, for the vandalism, for the fear now living in our home. If I had just stayed quiet, if I had just babysat longer, if I had just endured, those thoughts crept in during the quiet hours, poisoning everything. A few days later, Jessie called me. Not texted, called. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Her dad had been arrested. He'd gotten into a fight with his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. He was drunk. He punched the man. The police were called. Jessie and her brothers had been at the girlfriend's apartment when it happened. They were kicked out afterward. They had nowhere to go. "Can we come there?" she asked, voice shaking. "Just for one night. I'll figure something out. I promise." I felt sick. I brought it to my dad, every word heavier than the last. He went quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "One night." When Jessie and the kids arrived, they looked smaller somehow, worn down. The 3-year-old slept in her arms. The boys clung to her like anchors. My dad made sandwiches, set them up in the basement again. Jessie apologized over and over. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "for everything." My dad knelt in front of her. "This isn't your fault," he said. "None of it." The next morning, he called a contact at Child Services. They came quickly, asked questions, made arrangements. Victor's ex-wife agreed to take the kids temporarily. When Jessie left with the caseworker, she hugged me tight. "I won't forget this," she said. After the door closed, my dad sat at the kitchen table again, silent, hollow. "I wish I could have saved them," he said. That was the darkest moment. Not anger, not fear, but the realization that love alone isn't enough to fix someone who refuses to change. And that sometimes doing the right thing still means watching innocent people get hurt. The turning point didn't come with revenge. It came with clarity. A few days after Jessie and her brothers were placed with their mother, the house felt emptier than it had before Victor ever arrived. Not quieter, emptier, like something heavy had finally been lifted, leaving behind the bruises where it used to sit. My dad and I moved through our routines slowly, carefully. He went to work. I went to mine. We spoke in softer voices, like the walls were still listening. Then Teddy ran into my dad at the grocery store. She told him she'd heard about Victor's arrest, about the fight, about the drinking, about how his girlfriend had shown up at church asking for bail money and how no one gave her anything. "People are done enabling him," Teddy said. My dad nodded, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. Not for Victor, but for the version of Victor he thought he was helping. After that, something shifted. Victor went silent on social media. No more posts, no more rants, no more accusations, just nothing. For the first time in weeks, my dad slept through the night. He decided not to pursue a restraining order. The lawyer said we probably could, but my dad shook his head. If he stays away, he said, I don't want to pour more energy into him. I disagreed at first. I wanted finality, protection, something official. But then I realized something important. Victor's power over us had always come from attention, from reaction, from proximity. And now he had none. The real turning point came 3 weeks later. Victor showed up at our house. I wasn't home. I was at work when my dad called me afterward, his voice steady but serious. He came by, he said. He wanted to talk. My stomach dropped. Victor knocked, asked calmly, looked sober. My dad almost didn't let him in, but curiosity, or maybe closure, won out. Victor apologized. He said he'd been going to meetings, said the arrest was a wake-up call, said he knew he'd taken advantage of my dad's kindness. I messed up, he told him. I'm trying to do better. My dad listened, didn't interrupt, didn't argue. When Victor finished, he asked a question that changed everything. Are you asking for forgiveness, my dad said, or access? Victor hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. Victor asked if they could move past everything, rebuild their friendship. My dad said no. He told Victor he was glad he was getting help, but too much had happened. The harassment, the false report, the threats. Some lines don't get uncrossed, my dad said. Victor nodded, said he expected that answer, thanked him for listening. Then he left. When my dad told me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because Victor apologized, but because my dad finally chose himself. A week later, Jessie messaged me again. She said her dad told her he'd gone to apologize. She asked if my dad forgave him. I told her the truth. That he appreciated the apology, I said, but they won't be friends anymore. She said she understood. She told me she was living with her mom now, that it wasn't great, but it was stable, that her dad could see them every other weekend if he stayed sober. The boys were doing better. I think things are calmer now, she said. So were we. My dad went back to church. People apologized, some awkwardly, some sincerely. My dad accepted all of it and held on to none. A few weeks later, someone at church asked him if they could stay with us temporarily while they looked for an apartment. The old version of my dad would have said yes without thinking. This time he didn't. I can help you find resources, he said, but I can't house you. When he told me that, I smiled. That was the real turning point. Not when Victor fell apart, not when the truth came out, but when my dad learned the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice and chose balance. And when I realized that speaking up hadn't destroyed our lives, it had saved them. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet, undeniable, irreversible. Victor didn't resurface after that visit. No angry posts, no messages, no dramatic confrontations, just absence, the kind that speaks louder than rage ever could. Through mutual acquaintances, we learned pieces of the aftermath. Victor moved to another town about an hour away. The kids stayed with their mother. Child services was still involved. Supervised visitation only. Mandatory sobriety requirements. No exceptions. The man who once accused my dad of cruelty now had a paper trail documenting his own choices. And suddenly, no one was rushing to defend him. At church, the atmosphere shifted. People who had been distant started making eye contact again. A few approached my dad to apologize for believing Victor's story without asking questions. I should have listened, one woman said quietly. My dad nodded. We all want to help, he replied. Sometimes we just don't know how. What struck me was this. No one talked about Victor anymore. His name faded from conversations like something people were embarrassed to have believed in. That was the real consequence. Not public shaming, not revenge, but invisibility. My dad slowly returned to himself. He started volunteering again, but selectively. He set boundaries without explaining them. He slept better, laughed more, stopped checking the cameras every time a car drove by. One evening, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, I think I finally understand something. I waited. Helping shouldn't cost you your safety, he said, or your peace, or your child. I swallowed hard at that last word, because that was what this had always been about. Protecting me. Protecting Jessie, protecting kids who didn't have the power to protect themselves. A month later, I told my dad I'd saved enough for a deposit on an apartment. He smiled, proud, bittersweet. I'll miss you, he said, but I'm glad you're building your own life. The night before I moved, we sat on the porch like we used to when I was a teenager. No heavy conversations, No rehashing the past, just quiet companionship. "I'm glad you spoke up," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "I didn't want to at first," I admitted. "I was scared." He nodded. "Courage usually feels like fear that didn't stop you." I thought about Jessie sometimes, wondered how she was adjusting, whether she'd ever stop apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Then, 2 weeks before I moved, I got one last message from her. She said the boys were doing well. School was calmer, fewer fights, more routines. She thanked me again for listening, for helping, for telling the truth when it mattered. "I won't forget it," she wrote. Neither would I. Victor's story didn't end neatly. There was no redemption arc I could verify, no proof he'd changed beyond words. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. The truth had done what truth always does eventually. It stood. I moved out the following month. The apartment wasn't fancy. Second floor, thin walls, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, the silence felt different. Not tense, not waiting for something to go wrong. Just mine. My dad helped me carry boxes up the stairs. He hugged me longer than usual before leaving, then stood in the parking lot for a moment like he was memorizing the way my life looked now. We still talk every day. I visit every weekend. He's still the same man, kind, generous, willing to help, but now there's a pause before the yes, a space where boundaries live. I admire him even more for that. Looking back, I don't regret telling him the truth. I regret that it had to come at such a cost. But silence would have cost more. Victor wasn't destroyed by being held accountable. He was revealed. And that distinction matters. Consequences didn't fall on him because people were cruel. They fell because reality eventually demands honesty. The people who mattered learned the truth. The kids ended up somewhere stable. My father reclaimed his peace. And I learned something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Helping isn't the same as sacrificing yourself. Love doesn't require endurance of disrespect. And speaking up, especially when it's uncomfortable, isn't betrayal, it's protection. There's a version of me who stayed quiet, who babysat longer, who absorbed the stress, the exhaustion, the injustice, until it broke something permanent. I'm grateful I didn't become her. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you're wrong for finally saying this isn't okay, hear me when I say this. You're not selfish for having limits. You're not cruel for refusing to be used. And you're not responsible for fixing someone who refuses to fix themselves. Some people call that selfishness. I call it survival. And sometimes survival is the most honest thing you can choose.